All right, so next up is now that we have rigid bodies on our objects, we want to make them intuitive for the player to use and control that physics as best as we can. So constraints have a great way to actually do this. So utilizing constraints can limit how an object moves or rotates when affected by the gravinol. So if we don't have constraints on an object, it's going to lead to very clunky and awkward gameplay and probably frustrating to some players. So this very commonly I see with stacking crates or trying to put a board across a gap. If it's just fumbling around and then it gets off task, or off track, it's really hard to just realign that object unless you set up some other logic for it. But utilizing the constraints can easily give us a much more natural experience, right? So if we just limit the constraints, basically only allow this object to slide in the z-axis, that will lock that object only in that direction. And then we can use other pieces of geometry that you can see right here in the picture to actually set the range for how far that object will actually slide. So give it a little sense of why it's only moving in this direction, because there's other objects around preventing it. So be sure to utilize those constraints and utilize locking rotation if you want to stack objects, or making sure that objects are only moving on certain axes. I recommend things like big heavy objects like cars or dumpsters. Like, think about things that you don't maybe want the player to pick up over their head, right? So freezing it in the Y, but still allowing them to slide it on the X and the Z axis. Something that they can move on the ground and then jump onto or use for some other purpose. All right, so next up is just using physics, right? So using joints of some kind to create different minor setups. So here in this GIF, you can see this is just the concept of a spring joint and a hinge joint. To our hinge joints, you can see them all working in tandem with each other, can swing back and forth. So this you can use to create, a setup where you have like a chandelier that you swing through something, or like a wrecking ball that swings through a wall, or a pillar that you knock over on a single hinge. Spring joints I've seen used for, you can have some type of like platform that when the player jumps on it, it springs and has a little bit of recoil, maybe like dips underwater or some type of hazard. So definitely possible to utilize these joints in conjunction with the gravinol. So here's just a few different setup examples. The one down below you'll complete during your activity, but pretty much allowing something to function and rotate on a hinge, right? So there's a few important attributes you need to understand about the joints, and then from there you can start to utilize all the different types. All right, so those attributes you need to understand are right here. So first is the connected body. So what this is you'll see right here, it's an optional reference, so you don't have to include a connected body, but that's basically the rigid body that the joint is dependent upon. So if you want to have a chain of them, right, like in the previous slide, you saw the GIF of the rope swinging back and forth. Those were basically connected to each other. So the one above the chain is the connected body for the one down below. So basically, you can move one piece around, and then the joint will still move and follow as it should accordingly. All right. Next up is the anchor. So the anchor is the position of the axis around which the body swings, right? So basically, where the hinge is located, where it's hinging from, the position of the hinge. And remember, this is defined in local space. So if I have an object and its center point is, or its pivot point is its center, and I set the anchor to 0, 0, 0, that's going to bring my hinge to the center of that object, to that position. So it's all relative to that specific object's location. All right, next up is the axis. So the axis is the direction of your hinge, right? The directions of the axis around which the body swings. So anchor is the position or the location, axis is the direction. So you can get crazy and put like 1 for X and 1 for Z and have it be rotating on an angle, but I recommend just choosing one axis and having value 1 for that and then 0 for the others. You will see this update in Unity. There's a very small orange arrow Where that arrow is located is the anchor, and the direction it's pointing is your axis. So you can visually see that in the editor. All right. So limits. Using limits are going to, when you enable this, will allow the hinge to only move from a certain range. So the minimum and maximum is where you can set the range. Again, this is a local value, and sometimes these are, you might think it's 0 to 90, but in actuality it's like 270 to 360, and it just takes a bit of testing to get your right limit range. But this will allow you to control the distance that the hinge works, and not just fully go 360 and break through other objects. All right. Also, you'll see down here bounciness, which is basically when it reaches that limit, if it's going to just snap in place or if it's going to continue moving or ease into that or give a little recoil back and push back so it feels a bit more natural and not just hitting and sticking like it hit like glue. And then the contact distance. This is helpful for like any type of troubleshooting. Basically, if it's within the distance of that limit, it can basically remain in contact to avoid it jittering or breaking at all. So I'm not going to go through using a spring or a motor, but definitely feel free to check those out if you want to get into physics more. You'll see that they are finicky at times. It's not the perfect solution to everything. But using the hinge joints in controlled situations or using constraints can definitely lead to fun gameplay with the Grabnol and not require tremendous amounts of scripting at the same time.